I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Hi, I'm Chris Farrell with Judicial Watch. Welcome to this episode of On Watch. Joining us for this important news-breaking episode is Kimberly Klacik, an independent journalist and Baltimore activist, Scott Presler, a conservative activist, and my friend and colleague Michael Bekesha, senior attorney with Judicial Watch. We think we have a very exciting show ahead of you. We also have an important interview with a former Phoenix Police Department narcotics detective, someone who's also worked overseas, both in Mexico, Haiti, and the Balkans, to include also Iraq, specializing in things like narcotics, organized crime, cartel work. Mr. Robert Arce, we'll have an important interview with him as well as part of this show. So settle in, buckle up. We look forward to having you joining us. Thanks for tuning in. A few weeks back, the president created a stir when he talked about the conditions and circumstances in Baltimore. And as news cycles run, there was a flurry of activity and excitement, all sorts of name calling. I think the president pointed out in his tweet things that are just matters of fact. The response from the left was racist, to call him a racist. I think the problem is probably a lot more complicated than just name calling. And we're very fortunate today to have Kimberly Klacik join us to talk about the situation in Baltimore. We want to do a deeper dive. We want to go and discuss the facts and circumstances, the conditions on the ground in Baltimore, and not just be reduced to a 140-character tweet. And so we're very grateful that you joined us here today to talk about what's going on in Baltimore. You've got your own sort of vision, your own view of the circumstances, having done your own independent journalistic work, reporting from Baltimore, but being also a Baltimore activist. So, Kimberly, there's this flurry of excitement over a tweet.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more to the story. So why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of the backstory of how we got to this tweet and the reaction to it.
Okay, well, thanks for having me,
Sure.
First of all. So it was just insane, but I have to say that the president, I think he kind of played with the audience a little bit by not telling everyone where he got this information. So there was a morning when I was on Fox and Friends talking about some videos that I took in Baltimore City, but specifically West Baltimore, in some abandoned homes and some back alleys that had trash piled mile high.
Right.
And I had some interviews on there of some people that actually lived in the neighborhood, so actual residents and constituents of Congressman Elijah Cummings. So these videos I took them and they asked me if I could maybe tweet them out or post them in hopes that somebody will see it and actually get them some relief and have someone actually give them assistance. They had spent a lot of time calling Baltimore's Department of Public Works, and they are basically the city's arm that comes out and removes all this trash.
Sure.
So no one has done anything. And some of the places that I was, some of those alleys, that trash had been sitting there since December of 2018. So I started just posting them with the videos. I was copying Congressman Cummings on my videos in hopes that he would see it. But Fox saw it. I went on and spoke about it, and it just so happened that the president was watching as well. And that's where it all caught
So
fire.
in my view, context is king,
Yes.
right? We have to be able to contextualize things to understand them. The beauty of Twitter is that it's a very effective means of communicating.
Yes.
What it lacks is context, and I think it's important. Look, I used to live in Baltimore back in the early 90s, right? Long ago. But I lived and worked there for a couple of years. And I can tell you that 20 years ago, the conditions in West Baltimore were nearly identical to what they are today. And so there's been little or no improvement. Baltimore in some places is a beautiful, vibrant city.
Mm-hmm.
T. Rowe Price is headquartered there. There's the Inner Harbor development. This is now going back a couple of decades, but nonetheless, it's a tourist attraction.
Right.
Certainly Camden Yards for the Baltimore Orioles. There are some great parts of Baltimore. Mm-hmm. It's not a blanket condemnation of the city. There are portions that have sort of this urban blight that people have talked about. Here's the hypocrisy that I see. Look, all these news reporters and producers and writers and folks involved in the news media industry who shuttle back and forth between Washington, D.C. and New York. They're on the Amtrak Acela, rocketing back and forth between the two cities.
Yes.
And when they look out the window, they've been seeing the same neighborhoods for the same 20 plus years.
Absolutely.
So there hasn't been some dramatic change. There hasn't been some drastic improvement or decrease. I mean, the scenery hasn't changed out the window from the train. And they've gone past that every day for the last 20 years. And how much reporting has been done on a national basis?
None that I saw.
Not very much. I interviewed the United States Marshal for Maryland, Johnny Hughes. Johnny Hughes tells me that, this is a year ago I interviewed him, he told me that there are about 11,000 unserved warrants in Baltimore. And he and his marshals were very frustrated by that because it shows a posture with respect to law enforcement and prosecution that's incredibly weak. Right. So Johnny Hughes and his marshals looked at the 11,000 warrants that were outstanding. And this is a crime issue. This isn't a trash and upkeep of the city. But let me tell you, one leads to the other, right? They're connected.
Absolutely.
And so Johnny Hughes and his marshals pick 700 of the worst, the most violent, the most dangerous offenders who had outstanding warrants. And they went out and conducted weekend-long raids and picked up a large number of the 700 sort of worst of the worst. And do you know what happened in Baltimore for the next week? Not a single homicide. Not one. So that speaks to, I think, part of the broader conditions in Baltimore and in West Baltimore, probably one of the more afflicted neighborhoods. And people say Baltimore, it's a city of neighborhoods, right?
Right.
And so you can go 6 to 8 blocks and have a dramatic shift.
Yep.
So when you go to these neighborhoods, the Pennsylvania Avenue corridor is always sort of infamous for the urban blight conditions there. What are the people in Baltimore, the folks that live and work there, the folks that you've talked to, what's the message that you hear from them?
So surprisingly, I actually started asking people how they felt about President Trump and even just the attention that he brought to it. And everyone was thankful. They were happy. They were like, now someone's going to actually do something because President Trump spoke about it. And it's not like he brought shame to the city or he said, or brought shame to maybe even Congressman Cummings or anything like that. He was just kind of saying, look, do your job here, And so now people are happy. Things are getting done. We had volunteers come up and clean. And, some people, they were actually saying how they were on board even with Trump's immigration policy because they have seen that a lot. I don't know if you know, Baltimore is trying to become a sanctuary city. I think right now they're called a welcoming city. And they see jobs going left and right that they are no longer getting. And so there are people that are on the ground, they're frustrated. And I think people don't usually hear what they have to say, maybe because of our news sources, that we have the Baltimore Sun and such, that they don't really go out and talk to the residents and get their opinion on it. But that's why, I brought my camera out there and I said, you know what, let's hear from the people that are living in this every day.
Right, and living in those conditions, like I said before, for decades.
Yeah.
This is not something that just happened in the last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. This is a long-term problem. So people pay attention to what the president says, and of course Elijah Cummings reacted strongly. Has Elijah Cummings talked to you, or has he engaged with you on any level? Congressman
Cummings has not reached out at all, no.
I don't know what that says, but it's a thundering silence, perhaps.
Yeah.
How about let's bring it closer to home. How about within Baltimore itself, when it comes to the mayor, the city council, police commissioner? I know the police union has been very vocal about how the rank and file officers, what their working conditions are. Can you give us any insight, not at the national level, but at the city level? What kind of stuff is going on that you feel comfortable talking about?
Yeah, so just recently, I guess it was yesterday, the councilman president, Brandon Scott, he had a town hall. And this is like the first town hall in so many years that they actually hosted.
Which is remarkable.
Yes.
And if you trace that back, I think it ends up with you, but go ahead.
So they actually had so many people, they had to turn people away at the door. They were at capacity. And everybody wanted to chime in, not just on the crime and the violence, but just how the city is run in general. And I think, and they actually said they're going to do more because, again, more people want to be heard. So they're going to do a series of these town halls, I believe it's 7 in total, just to get people to weigh in and tell them what their issues are. I think that's the problem. City council, the mayor, city hall in general, they've never actually gone out and listened to their constituents. And so they're playing this guessing game at city hall. And I like to remind people, overnight, they removed Confederate statues in Baltimore when it was like a hot topic. Some of the trash is still sitting there today.
So it's a question really of political will.
Exactly. Exactly.
This is 2019, so we have to have a pop culture reference to everything because people aren't going to pay attention to Baltimore, other than really 2 things that come to mind pop culture-wise. are two television shows, right? So there's Homicide: Life on the Streets, that's like 93 to 99 or 2000. That was a very popular show. And for the rest of America, that's their impression of Baltimore.
Yes.
I know that sounds very superficial and trivial, but let me tell you, it has an impact, right?
Absolutely.
It's a pop culture media kind of reference, but there's a story being told about a city. And then the other series, of course, that had a huge impact, again, creates impressions. But I think there's verisimilitude, right? There's truth in the storytelling. They're fictional stories, but they're based on fact, right? And that's The Wire, right? An HBO series, long running, that talked about exactly the neighborhoods you've been talking about. And so whether it's the president or Representative Cummings, or whether it's the city council, the mayor, the police commissioner, the impression created, and again, these series go back 2 decades, right? And you have to ask yourself, what have they been doing? What does it take to get their attention? And I think that you've gotten their attention. I think that the more attention that's called to it, the better, which really kind of segues or leads us to our friend and colleague, Scott, who it isn't the answer. It's not going to fix Baltimore overnight. But Scott, you did something very powerful, very important. You really demonstrated to the public what an activist, what a concerned citizen can do. Talk to us a little bit about your efforts in Baltimore.
Well, thank you for Judicial Watch for having me. I'm a big fan. I didn't realize what I was doing. I put out one tweet in response to, President Trump and everybody talking and tweeting and posting, but nobody was trying to solve the actual problem. So I said, I'm going to go to Baltimore, even if it's me standing on a street corner picking up trash. And that tweet went viral. I had people from all over the country saying, Scott, how can I contribute? What can I do to support you? And so within 6 days, we planned to go to Baltimore, and we picked up 12 tons of trash in 12 hours.
Let's pause. 12 tons of trash.
12 tons of trash,
hours.
24,000 pounds of trash.
Right. And this is the message here is deeds, not words.
Thank you.
People have talked about this endlessly for decades, as Kim and I have been talking about, but it's the deeds, it's the action. You can talk about it incessantly, and that's wonderful, good intentions, but you went on the ground, and it by no means cured Baltimore's problems, but it was a positive step. So talk about how you actually put this in action. How did you actually get all these folks in, and what did you do, and how did you do it?
Well, I created a Google Doc, and I said, sign up for a shift. So I originally planned only to be out there for a couple hours. But no, we did 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. People could sign up for 2-hour shifts or more.
Right.
And literally, we set up at 7, had a canopy. We had Sam's Club donate 1,000 water bottles. So big shout out to Sam's Club for their generous donation.
Sure.
And even Bill Pulte, the philanthropist on Twitter, he donated can liners to us and gloves as well. So we really had the community coming together in an outpouring of love to help.
And how many volunteers do you think came in to, it may not be an exact number, but ballpark figure, how many folks showed up?
We had 170 people sign in, but I think it was more than that, quite frankly, because at the end of 13 hours, I mean, I was so tired.
I'm sure.
I didn't know who was coming and going at the end of that day. I was like, is Kim here? What's going on? Where am I? Yeah. So no, we had, I would say, 200 volunteers. But here's the best part. Not only did West Baltimore come out, not only did Maryland and the local residents come, but we had DC, Maryland, Virginia, Texas, Florida, Connecticut, Utah. We had a family fly in from Utah because they wanted to help Baltimore.
And so this is more on the mechanics side of it. What did you do? I mean, obviously it's a matter of bags and hands, right? Stuff the bags. How did you get that amount of trash cleaned up, organized, loaded up on a truck, and hauled out? How did that all happen?
Well, I need to step back for a second and say that before we got the roll-offs, because we paid out of our own money and donations that were given to us to help with the cleanup, we paid for 3 30-yard, 3-ton dumpster roll-offs. And all 3 of them, by the end of the day, were packed to the brim. I mean, probably over the ton limit than we should have.
Right.
But no, we had a trash collector come, bring the roll-off, we'd fill it up, they'd bring it out and come in with another one. And that way we're taking all the trash we collected out of the city. However, we did apply for permits with the city of Baltimore. And we wanted to do it respectfully. We wanted to do it the right way.
Sure.
On Wednesday morning, a couple days before the event. And we went in. We didn't hear from them until the day after the event was finished. And we got a message saying that your permits for the dumpsters have been denied. And all I could do is shake my head and go, we already came to your city. We already picked up the trash. We already removed 12 tons of trash in 12 hours. And it just makes me scratch my head and wonder, can the city be doing more for their people? And I think the answer is yes.
So I want to drill down on the accountability aspect of this, because I know Kim has talked about this in some of her videos. This is a question of local accountability, right? So there are public servants, both elected and career folks, appointees, et cetera. But these are government servants who are supposed to be serving their constituents, the people of West Baltimore. And you come in and say, look, you got it organized, want to haul trash. You file for the correct permits. You go through the process. Can you identify either the obstacle or the office or the impediment? What was the hang-up? How did this not go through at Baltimore?
The hang-up was we called them every single day, hounding them respectfully, of course, and they were just frankly not very nice over the phone to Alex, our local resident who lives there,
right,
that applied for the permits. So I'm not sure if it was politically motivated on their part. I'm not sure if they wanted a conservative activist to come into their town to do the work that they aren't doing for their people. But I want to tell you a quick story. I was out there removing trash from an alleyway where there was a dead rat right there.
Right.
And this woman comes out and says, I just saw you on TV, and I just want to say I'm thankful you're here because I'm a grandmother. And I have grandbabies that play out here in the street, and it's hazardous. And they do have abandoned buildings where there's broken glass, it's not safe, and these are where the grandchildren play. And she said, I just want to say thank you because I've taken videos of people illegal dumping in the neighborhoods where we even have the license plate, and I've sent it to the city, and the city does nothing to help us. So these people, I want to make it clear, the people of Baltimore love their city so much, and it's not the people that are the problem. It's people coming in illegal dumping, it's the city owning the abandoned buildings that they're not taking care of, and it's the city not taking action when the residents tell them, we need these alleys cleaned up more than once a year. I have video of people illegal dumping. So there are so many steps that need to be taken, but I hope that these actions of Kim's video and my coming to town empower the residents to actually raise their voices, to go to city council and mayoral meetings and let the city leadership know more needs to be done.
So what is the follow-on? What's the next step? I mean, this is a great, response to an initial sort of burst of coverage and activity and interest. But 6 months from now, I'm a big believer in follow through, right? You can identify a problem, talk about it, say, oh, that's horrible, and everyone kind of goes on to the next thing. I don't think Baltimore deserves that. I don't think the people of Baltimore deserve that. I think that there's an obligation, a commitment really on folks, particularly now, we all have guilty knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. We all know better. And you can't just turn a blind eye and go, oh, well, that's gone on for far too long, decades. So what are the next steps? What are some practical measures, some practical means that the people in West Baltimore can do, that other activists, your colleagues and your affiliates, folks that would be in the same thing, and then Kimberly also, Baltimore's home. Mm-hmm. So there's a call to action necessary here. And Kimberly, I'll start with you. What's the call to action? What are people who are watching this show, whether they're Baltimoreans, whether they're Marylanders, whether they're in this Eastern Seaboard, I don't care where they are, mm-hmm. What needs to be done? What's your suggestion?
So I was kind of just taken back by the whole thing. And I thought, this is overwhelming. And I'm pretty sure that's probably how city officials feel at this point.
Sure.
So I actually made a Gmail account, and I just went out and I posted it, and I said, if anyone has any tips let me know. So on my YouTube channel, I've been interviewing more people. They've been telling me what the problems are. We've actually gotten results in some areas. So there were some people that were dealing with trash and the yard, out of control next door that's owned by the city. It's been sitting like that since 2017. And guess what? Now that the video's coming out, they've already cleaned it up. And so that's a lot. They need to actually hold people accountable, the contractors accountable for doing these jobs. And I say holding them accountable, I mean city officials. But not only that, I think now might be the time for city residents to take a look at who they're electing and putting in office. Maybe they look at a different option.
Kimberly, thank you very much. Scott, keep up the good work. We appreciate it very much. We appreciate your time. We appreciate the information and insights because, frankly, no one else has done a deep dive like this, and we really appreciate all the work that you've done. We're going to have more On Watch coming up. Stay tuned. Thanks for joining us here on Watch. I'm Chris Farrell, your host. Next up, we've done an interview, an important interview. It's an update on our reporting in our last episode about national security and the border. I interviewed a retired Phoenix Police Department detective, highly decorated, Robert Irsay. Robert also has a background since his retirement with Phoenix Police Department working narcotics, organized crime, anti-cartel, all sorts of important criminal operations on contract outside the United States, providing law enforcement assistance in places like Iraq, Haiti, and Mexico. He's got some unique insights, some reporting that you won't see or hear anywhere else. So let's go to our interview with Robert Irsay. Joining us now is Robert Irsay, a retired Phoenix police detective with decades of experience dealing with narcotics, organized crime, the Mexican cartels, and a wide breadth of experience also overseas, serving in law enforcement capacities in support of U.S. missions in places like Iraq, Haiti, and Mexico. Bob, welcome to On Watch.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you join us. Listen, we do a lot of reporting on the border, on national security, on the humanitarian crisis that we face at the border. What we try to do is go sort of behind the headlines, a deeper dive into some of the reporting that the American public does not see on a routine basis. And I've always been impressed over the time that we've known each other in your insights and your reporting on what's happening, not deep inside Mexico, but frankly, a stone's throw across the border, and also the impact or the bleed over of criminal activity in Mexico that makes its way in one form or another into the United States. Bob, we've just gone through, in the last week, a horrific shooting at the Walmart in El Paso, Texas. But you did some reporting, you did some studying and some interviews and wrote a great report on what the violence, what the impact is of narcotics, of the cartels, just across the river from El Paso in Juarez. Can you tell us a little bit about the level of violence in Juarez, Mexico?
Well, the level of violence right now, there's an all-out war going on between rival cartels, and it's been going on for quite a long time now. There was a war that went on probably 7-8 years ago, and a group won. One cartel was able to establish dominance over the other cartels. But since then, probably within the last 2 years, the violence is ticking upwards again, and it's right on our doorstep.
And who are the rival cartels? Who's going back and forth at each other so violently?
Right now, in Juarez, it's a Sinaloa cartel. A branch of the Sinaloa cartel is still there, as well as what was left over of the Juarez cartel. And they have joined forces with Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, which is CJNG, which is the cartel that's spreading rapidly throughout Mexico and spreading violence at unbelievable levels again.
And Bob, the Jalisco New Generation cartel, those are the folks who just a couple of years ago were able to shoot down Mexican Army helicopters using RPGs, correct?
Yes. Yes,
yeah, and that's a marked uptick in the level of violence, the sophistication, their tactics and techniques, and I'm sure that's made a very strong impression on Mexican law enforcement and the Mexican military.
Yes, and they're actively recruiting Mexican military people to join ranks with them. They're setting banners out throughout wherever they're going in to conquer territory, they're setting up banners and encouraging Mexican army personnel to join forces with them and telling them, we will pay you better, we will feed you better.
It's a level of violence that I don't think the American public truly comprehends, in part because, other than your excellent reporting, there's really very little coverage in American media. They essentially ignore what is really happening just a stone's throw across the border. Some of the reporting that you've come up with, in particular, trying to give an idea to the American public about, while we suffered this horrific, really terroristic attack in a Walmart, Mexico began to posture, and some people within Mexico, various organizations and entities, sort of made noises about how they should bring some sort of international action, a legal action against the United States or against President Trump. But I think your reporting points out the disparity between the level of violence in El Paso and the level of violence in Juarez. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think the reason I ask that is because context is so critical in understanding what the real conditions are.
Yes, one of the things, working overseas, I was in Mexico for 3 years, working there for a U.S. law enforcement program with Department of State. And I got to cover for some time Ciudad Juarez, although I was based in Monterrey. But in El Paso, for instance, last year, I believe they had 23 homicides. And in Ciudad Juarez, right across the border, there was 1,247 homicides in the city. A couple of years back, there was, when the war had escalated about 7 years ago, there was 3,300 homicides in Ciudad Juarez and 5 in El Paso for a whole year.
Right, and I think that's at the point when Juarez was labeled as the most violent city in the Western Hemisphere, if my memory serves.
Yes, and right now that distinction goes to Tijuana. Tijuana, with the record-breaking year they had last year, was declared the most dangerous city in the Western Hemisphere or in the world right now.
So it's my impression, or at least it's my opinion, that very often when there's reporting about border violence, it's as though there's people would like to believe that there's some sort of like Ziploc seal between Mexico and the U.S. and that the level of violence in Mexico, while extraordinary, it really doesn't come across, or it doesn't have any real major impact on the United States. And I know that you know firsthand that that is not the case. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about how this incredible level of violence in Mexico has an impact on the United States, and how maybe it's not always reported as fully and accurately as it should be.
In Phoenix alone, I'm a retired Phoenix police detective. I'm a fluent Spanish speaker. So I dedicated most of my career to working Mexican organized crime in one form or another, from being an undercover cop to working gang cases, gang homicide cases. I worked kidnappings. I was in a wiretap unit that did wiretaps on Mexican drug cartels operating in Phoenix. Every major single drug case in Phoenix always has a nexus. 95% of them will have a nexus back to Mexico. They are the suppliers. As far as homicides, the violence has been in our country as far back as I started my career.
Right.
Phoenix PD, we have lost, I believe, from the time of my career to the current time, we've lost about 7 Phoenix officers to illegal alien criminals from Mexico. Statewide, I think the number is about 15 or 16. And that doesn't even include other officers from other agencies. As far as when I mentioned the 7, my old undercover partner, was a DEA agent. He was put on his knees and executed as he begged for his life June 30th of '94 during an undercover deal gone bad. So those of us who speak Spanish, who work Mexican organized crime, kind of laugh when we hear the reports of fears that maybe the violence may cross the border. It's in our country. It's in our country. We see it, especially those of us who work in that segment of the criminal population. And our argument is always, we hear people say we should deport them, the criminals. Well, if you deport them and you don't secure the border, they're back the very next day. We've seen it over and over again. And as an undercover guy working Mexican drug gangs, there were many times judges would release criminals on big cases, multi-kilo sales to us, and they would get out on a low bond. And a month or 2 months later, I have an informant take me to a body shop to introduce me to this new criminal. And it turns out I spot him before he spots me. It's the same guy I busted 2 or 3 months earlier. And just by the grace of God, I was able to spot him first and get out. It could have turned really nasty. And
sure.
These are things that don't get reported. And it happens over and over again.
And that's your experience in Phoenix, but if you go east or west along the border, from California to Texas, there are other professional police officers, uniformed folks, detectives, undercover officers, and they are facing these sorts of challenges, and in some cases these are life-threatening. This isn't just handling a confidential informant or trying to work a case tough. This is life or death, a gun stuck in your face, your partner being executed. And I don't think that there's a real appreciation, a real understanding that all of this crime, all of the effort put into thwarting it, is essentially, it's airbrushed out of our public narrative. It's not reported and discussed. And I think that the danger to the American public is that the sort of the retail level of this kind of violence is executed by gangs who are essentially the retail street level arm of these cartel operations.
Yes, of course. In the late, as far as officers from LA to San Diego to Texas, all the way along, anywhere you have a large migrant community, you're going to have illegal alien criminals. You're going to have them there. We all go to the same training schools.
And on that point, we're going to break for a short second and come back and continue our interview with Robert Irsay. Stay tuned. We're back with Robert Irsay in our interview of this highly decorated police detective, retired from Phoenix Police Department, and also with a lot of years of experience operating on behalf of the United States in a law enforcement capacity overseas in places like the Balkans, Iraq, and Haiti. Bob, when we left our last portion of the interview, we were talking about the gangs, whether it be MS-13, 8th Street, and frankly a host of other gangs that act as sort of the retail or the street level muscle and arm, the distribution network for the Mexican cartels. And I think that if you could just sort of expand on the idea that that street level gang operation isn't something that happens in El Paso and Phoenix and Tucson, but this is going on in Akron, Ohio, and Massapequa, Long Island, New York, and a host of other communities around the country.
Yes, we like to refer to, well, what happens is that you'll have a group of migrant workers, say for instance in Yakima, Washington. You'll have a group of Yakima, and there'll be a large group, and they'll look around, they'll say, wow, we don't have any markets, food markets, bakeries, butcher shops, but also we don't have a drug market, and we have a population to support it. So what they'll do is they'll call down south, and they'll send their foot soldiers, and a lot of the foot soldiers could be young street gang members or just people right off the ranch in Mexico, and they'll go up, eliminate or force local dealers to work for them, and then they set up shop in Akron, Ohio. They'll be in places that you would never think. They're in Lexington, Kentucky. They're in Alabama, setting up shop. And that's how, if you look at the map, it spreads. It's spread all over the U.S., and then with it, you'll have the violence to keep the dominance in that area, and the overdoses, where I believe a lot of people overlook. People are dying daily from the overdose, and all this is coming from south of our border primarily.
I call it the Walmart distribution theory. If you go to Walmart, they never run out of milk, right? It's always there. And this is the same thing. Any community in the United States, if you're looking for drugs, you're going to find it. And the delivery mechanism at the retail street level, the distribution part of this, are these gangs that act as the distribution and the muscle, U.S.-based arm of the drug cartels. I wanted to go back to another excellent piece of reporting that you did with respect to the uptick in both the sort of sophistication, both in armament and techniques and tactics of the cartel armies. You had a report coming from the Mexican military about the cartels now having gun trucks. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, we're starting to see it, and it's something that's gone in stages, but it's coming up again, with much more frequency. I reported on a group that was along the Sonora-Chihuahua border, which that area right there is primarily, they're warring groups of Sinaloa cartel going at it with each other, against each other, and they're getting trucks and using homemade armor and making them look like something out of Mad Max or something with gun turrets. They're putting 50 cals on top of it, and that's how they're warring with each other. And this is going on throughout many parts of Mexico because they'll set up a vehicle to lead the charge, and then the other vehicles will be behind. It's not uncommon for them the Mexican army to encounter 3-4 trucks, caravan with all custom armor on the vehicle with bulletproof glass to take on not only other rivals, but to take on the police and the military, and the police are no match for them down there.
Yeah, I mean, you can't imagine a police cruiser with an officer or two running up on a modified SUV with either a 50 caliber machine gun or even a minigun, essentially a gun pod on the roof of the SUV. They're going to be shredded. And so talk about just for a second what the impact is on Mexican policing, both at the city level or even the federal police, and what their efforts are, what their plans are to counteract that level of sophistication, tactics, armament. What are they doing?
Well, most of those police agencies cannot take on the cartels by themselves, so it's requiring the federal government to deploy federal police, military, who have stronger armament, the vehicles to match the cartels. Municipal police in most of these places, they would be insane to try and make a stop of a convoy. They just have to let them pass through. They do not have the capability to take on this threat. So what is requiring is a federal government to come in and deploy their personnel, and then you run into, of course, the new president was talking about he was going to just declare there's no more drug war, like the cartels are just going to stop. It's not going to stop. So the violence that we see right now in Mexico, as far as homicide numbers, are highest that they've ever been, and I think that's a result. I think a lot of my contacts in Mexico say they see a weak president in this fight, and they believe they can take more territory, make more money, because it's all about making money, money and power through the politics. And that's what's happening right now, and it's spreading rapidly to other areas that there was no violence before.
Which leads me to close with this thought, and that is that Judicial Watch has proposed in a written white paper, laying out a document as to how the U.S. and through President Trump's authority could designate the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. I've been advocating this for something like, 8 or 9 years now, but we've gone ahead and done a study. We laid it out in black and white. And what's interesting is, we've proposed this foreign terrorist organization designation for the cartels because that's frankly what they are. They are foreign terrorists. And they're directly impacting and threatening the United States in a way that, affects every community in this country. And surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, there's even resistance within the administration for doing that, because there's folks that frankly just don't want to rock the boat, or they think it's too aggressive or it's destabilizing. But frankly, I think that we're in a position now where we're going to have to do for the Mexican government what it can't do for itself. So listen, Bob, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your excellent, excellent reporting. You're telling a story that no one else does. I know that my colleagues and I here at Judicial Watch really appreciate and support all of your work. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on, and we'll talk again.
Thanks, Bob.
Sure.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of On Watch. I trust you enjoyed our interview with Robert Irsay. He has some incredibly important insights with respect to national security and the border and the consequences for us here in the United States. I'd now like to turn to my friend and colleague, Michael Bekesha, Senior Attorney at Judicial Watch. Michael, you're on the hot seat.
Thanks for having me back.
You get to give us a little Judicial Watch legal update. We've got an awful lot going on, probably too much to even cover, but I think there's some important points that you can kind of give us a briefing on.
I mean, how much time do we have? Because we have about 11 attorneys on staff with a little over 100 active cases. So
there's a lot to talk about.
There is. A couple cases I want to talk about. We recently sued the Secretary of State in California over California's new law requiring candidates for president to release their tax returns so that they can be on the primary ballot.
And so this is frankly just a targeting of President Trump.
It is. I mean, California admitted so. California also, the former governor rejected the bill 2 years ago, saying it was unconstitutional. Everybody thinks it's unconstitutional because the Constitution, the United States Constitution, sets the qualifications for president.
Right.
This changes it. And yes, no one is hiding the fact it is done solely to target the president. However, there are also several, I think 6 or 7 of the, 150 Democratic candidates that are running that still also haven't released their tax returns.
Right. That isn't discussed very much though, is it, Michael?
It's not.
It's a
it's
street.
More than just the president. You know, it could be a total, I think, of up to 10 candidates that want to be on the primary ballot, won't be able to. So Judicial Watch is representing 4 taxpayers in California, 2 Republicans, a Democrat, and independent,
right,
that want to be able to choose who they can vote for, and California is preventing them.
And I think Gavin Newsom, the governor, said that with respect to this other legislation, he just wanted to send a message.
Yes.
And you know, using the legislative process, the lawmaking powers of the governor's office and the legislature to send a message when you know that it's not constitutional, what does that tell you about how serious they are?
Oh, they're not serious about it at all. They just want to harass the president. You're seeing this not only in California, but around the country. Judicial Watch has been monitoring attorneys general around the country that are really just targeting the president because they don't like his politics. And, you know, for example, in Maryland, the Attorney General of Maryland isn't focusing, say, on Baltimore and the people of Baltimore, what needs to be done. He's focusing on the president and spending way too much time building coalitions around the country without worrying about his backyard. And Judicial Watch has sued for records about one of those cases where his focus is elsewhere. And we have upcoming depositions to learn more about what attorneys general around the country are doing.
And I can rest assured that the attorneys general and their staff, they just love sitting for deposition with Judicial Watch. That's one of the highlights of their professional career. Michael, what else do we have boiling on the stove?
Oh, we have this other case that we recently filed in South Bend, Indiana, with Mayor Pete Buttigieg. We learned that a few years back he wanted to provide ID cards for illegal aliens. He realized that if he did it directly through the city administration, that records would be made available to the public. And so he found a nonprofit, or a nonprofit approached him and said, we're going to do all the heavy lifting. You just have to bless the card and treat it as a government card. The mayor then issued an executive order saying, I know this contract is in place between this nonprofit and this ID manufacturer, and we are going to accept this card whenever it starts as though it's a real government ID. You can open bank accounts, libraries, get some city benefits. We saw this and we said, that's interesting. Let's learn more about how this happened. And so we sent a series of public records requests to the mayor's office, the police chief, the administration of the city of South Bend, asking for records and emails about the creation of the program. We're not asking for names of illegal aliens. We're not asking for private sensitive information. We want Mayor Pete's emails about what he thought about the program and how he was going to set it up.
And this is really, this is a process question. Again, we know that there are folks out there who will wave their arms and scream hysterically that somehow unlawfully present aliens are being targeted. And just for clarity, that is absolute nonsense. This is an effort to uncover how the mayor and how his staff engaged in this process, and that's really what the effort is all about.
It is, and you know, he's proud of this accomplishment. He's talked about it. There are articles about it, but there isn't, for a 1-year period of time that we know of, a single email between him or his staff and this nonprofit that's running the program. So my question is, he's what, 38 years old, and he says he has no email? Does that mean he has a private server? Is he deleting those emails? Is he just hiding them? What is going on? And since we filed the lawsuit, unfortunately, his campaign has attacked Judicial Watch. The mayor's office has attacked Judicial Watch. The nonprofit organization has attacked Judicial Watch, saying we're out there to get illegal aliens or for criminal aliens or undocumented residents. We're not. It's a process question. We just want to see the emails. We want to know how this program started and how it's being funded and taking place. And there are no records about it, allegedly.
All great cases, important cases, and I think ones that we'll see headlines on in the future. And I can't resist but point out that just this week also, Judicial Watch produced all of the 302s, the investigative reports by the FBI with respect to Bruce Orr and the Russia hoax, his involvement with his wife, and funneling information into the Department of Justice and FBI. And I encourage all of our viewers to go to judicialwatch.org and take a look at those Bruce Orr 302s. You can read them for yourself. You may disagree philosophically or with your own sort of editorial viewpoint on how we've characterized them, but that's the beauty of what Judicial Watch does. We get the records, you get to read them. So stick around. We'll come back in just a few moments with some more thoughts on this week's episode of On Watch. Welcome back to On Watch. As we close out this episode of On Watch, I think that an important fact with respect to our discussion about Baltimore to kind of recap and reevaluate is not just the urban blight question, but the crime question in Baltimore. I was doing a little research before the show and uncovered a fact that is incredibly disturbing with respect to why Baltimore in the last 10 to 15 years has lost 100,000 residents. People have simply abandoned the city. So when you see abandoned homes, there's a reason. The population has shrunk by 100,000. In 2017, Baltimore recorded 342 murders. That's bad enough, but if you look at it, it's the highest per capita rate. It's more than double of Chicago's. It's far more than any other city of the 500,000 population bracket. And this is the number that, to me, was just astounding. It's a larger absolute number of killings than New York City, which is 14 times larger than Baltimore. So if you think about New York, and New York's always held up, as sort of this dangerous urban area, although its crime stats have gone up and down. Baltimore has a problem. It's an urban blight problem with development, but there's a violence problem. There's a problem that I think the police in the city are very frustrated by, the rank and file members of the police department. But as we kind of close out on our discussion of Baltimore, I'd like to turn to you for just a second and get your sort of closing thoughts on what we should know about what's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I labeled it as a crisis in Baltimore because everyone talks about the crisis at the border. We have a crisis going on. And I have to say, with those numbers, we also have Hopkins, we have shock trauma, we have a lot of shootings that don't turn out to be fatal shootings.
Right.
And so people have to understand that number. I think right now it's double what it was in 2015. And it's also, this is a very complicated issue because if you remember the riots in 2015.
Right, the Freddie Gray riots.
Exactly. And so that neighborhood, the Pennsylvania corridor, that's exactly where I was, and that's where all of that happened. The CVS burned down. So this has been going on for a long time. If you look at the school system, you can see so many students, they graduate somehow, but they can barely read and do basic math, so they're just pushing them along. And there is a problem.
It's the whole fabric of the community
Yes.
that's really at risk.
Absolutely.
Scott?
Well, I want to say what we did when we went to Baltimore, it needs to be more than just a Band-Aid, more than just me, an outsider from Virginia coming into Maryland.
Correct.
And that's why we're going back. We will be having a second Baltimore cleanup on Monday, September 9th. But I want to make it clear what we're doing is more relationship building, community building. I'm going to go out there and see 81-year-old Louise again and knock on her door and invite her and Miss Grace and Mr. Lawrence and all the members of the community that I met with to come partner with us. We want this to be relationship building because I'm not always going to be here. They are. The community needs to step up and also partner with the city, with the police. This needs to be everybody coming together
Correct.
as a team.
Correct. Absolutely. Michael, what's on the horizon? What are we looking for in the next coming days or weeks?
Litigation's a slow process, and so Judicial Watch never gives up, and so every month we're getting, we just got the 302s for Bruce Orr,
Right.
but every month we're getting more records about the Clinton investigation, about former Director Comey and what he was up to, Andrew McCabe. I mean, all those names you hear about, we're not going away anytime soon. We're only getting, we're getting thousands of pages every month, but we're going to be doing that for the next couple of years. Easily. So stay tuned, and we'll have more good stuff coming.
To echo what you say, we never quit, we never forget, we don't go away. We're quite persistent. Some would find us quite annoying. That's a good thing. That's just fine. Across the aisle, both sides, we are a principles over politics organization, and we've been that way now for 25 years. And I'm very proud of that, having been there for 20 of the 25. Thank you at home for joining us for this episode of On Watch. We're glad that you took the time to view our show, to take this deeper dive into some larger questions that I think are treated superficially. But it's our goal to bring you the backstory, to bring you an in-depth look at topics, whether they be the situation in Baltimore, the crisis, the national security crisis on our border, thanks to our friend Robert Irsay, and then to get important legal updates from my friend and colleague Michael Bekesha. I'm Chris Farrell, On Watch.